Next up, we're going to be talking with Mark Verma and his new comic book and Kickstarter campaign. Mark, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, Frank. So I'm here to talk about Grain issue number one, which is launching on Kickstarter September 3rd.
September 3rd. Excellent. Okay. And can you give us a quick little synopsis or what is Grain about?
Yeah, sure. The short promotion I've been doing lately is saying that Grain is a sand child and his trusty bubble in a world at war. So the story takes place after World War II, rather at the end of World War II, and they've just kind of arrived on Earth over the cliffs of Dover, England.
Okay.
And they're not quite sure why they're back, and they're just kind of randomly floating around into sort of familiar territory, trying to figure things out from there.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I had a chance to be able to review some of the comic book, and we'll be going in depth in that first soon. But first, let's talk about you as a comic book writer and creator. So first, I want to know, what did this idea come from? Where did you decide to I want to get into to grain?
Sure. So initially, it was not my plan to dive into a children's comic book,
Hmm.
but I'd come from a previous project that I created called Eye of the Keeper. And Eye of the Keeper was kind of a long story. And after a while, I realized that, you know what, I kind of should complete this at another time and focus on something that's a little smaller, a little more fun, and sort of quicker to release. So that's kind of where Grain came in. And actually, that happened by accident. I wasn't consciously thinking about what to create. I was just kind of lying in bed, and there was some dust falling off my ceiling fan, and I thought about the word grain. Yeah, so like Grain came about, and then I thought, I'm a big fan of superhero comics, and I wanted to inject that awesome superhero feel into Grain, but I didn't necessarily want it to be a full blown superhero comic. So Grain is really a humble story about a character that just arrives on Earth, and he's surrounded by this bubble, kind of like a wet bubble you'd
Hmm.
blow from one of those soap things. And from there, I kind of made it kind of cosmically powered. And although you don't really see all that power in action just yet, but you kind of know it's there, and you're kind of curious about where this is headed.
All right. Yeah. Uh, so it just kind of came organically to you, and you had already been working on comics before. Is there any other comics that you have been working on previously?
Yeah, so Eye of the Keeper was the other book I did, and I actually released a first issue back in 2004, 2005.
Hmm.
And I created about eight or nine other issues after that, which were available digitally on my website. But just looking at that project in hindsight, it's kind of an amateur work, and where I'm currently at is much more professional, much more seasoned as a writer.
Yeah, that happens with everybody. Even our podcast, the first few episodes recordings are terrible, and now we have the proper equipment and experience. You kind of get worn into it, so it is nice. Um, what kind of other comics or comic book creators have inspired you and in your works?
Well, that's interesting because Grain is like with Grain specifically, I wasn't looking at anything. you know, I was actually thinking about cartoons from my childhood. So I was thinking about a show called Jeremy the Bear. I don't know if you recall that, but it was a long time ago. And
I haven't heard of that one before.
yeah, he had like this friend who had a suitcase and with all sorts of buttons, and the suitcase could turn into a helicopter or a
Hmm.
boat or something. And I was just thinking about cartoons from my childhood, which was the 80s. So it's a bit of a ways back. But comic book wise, I came from the 90s, and in terms of being a fan of comics, so I was really interested in stuff that Todd McFarlane was doing and
Oh
Jim
yeah.
Lee.
Oh wow.
Stuff was more inspiring my Eye of the Keeper work, but with Grain, it was more animation. So yeah, just looking at the animation and comics like the Incredibles and stuff, and just kind of getting a feel for the cute sort of bubbliness of the cartoons that are created for younger kids today.
Yeah, and it totally stands out too. When you're looking at the work, it's vibrant and it's almost like juxtaposed to the subject matter, which is one thing I really liked. Is you have this beautiful world and bright colors, and then you're dealing with deep topics like war and the aftermath. It's really interesting.
Definitely. I was working with Roma Guska, who's the artist on the project, and
Hmm.
she, we actually, when we first started talking, we did a bit of a test to see like how the art would look, and she did all these color tests, and actually in the beginning it wasn't quite working out. I was like, why aren't the colors gelling? She's such a great artist. So I kind of said to her, why don't we just do a sample, but do the colors as if some digital artist came along and made it a big Candyland kind of color scheme.
Yeah.
And so we kind of colored everything the way it wasn't supposed to be colored, and I'm like, yep, that's what I want.
That's perfect because you got to think you're looking at it through the perspective of a child almost. This is for a so it's amazing as an adult you're reading and looking at this world and your perspective is skewed because you know what this is and yet from a child's point of view it's a whole new world. It's quite beautiful really. Uh,
Thank you, thank you. Yes, and definitely, you're right. It's like I kind of injected that childhood quality of perception that Grain has, and I wanted to show the readers what he's seeing, not just necessarily what they're seeing, because there's a few things they've got to figure out as they progress in the artwork, and then reading with the story, you get a sense that there's more than meets the eye with the art.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Let's go ahead and look into what it typically takes to create a comic book. So you had the idea, you saw the dust, and you thought, I need to make grain. How did you go about that comic book process? Just real general strokes.
Sure, yeah, like that was a huge process, and I started out with a script, and Grain wasn't actually what it is right now. It was more undefined,
Hmm.
and it was kind of mysterious. And I wanted people to see artwork and see story, but you knew something cool was happening. You just didn't know where it was going yet. And then I worked with an editor in Florida by the name of Rachel Sternad, and she read my work and says this is really great visually. You just got to hone that story and focus on that story more. So she gave me a few pointers, and then I went back and rewrote. So basically, yeah, rewriting the script took me about 8 months, back and forth, and then um, I finally found an artist that would gel with me, and then that process took up to 3 years.
Oh wow, yeah, that's extensive.
It is long because it was a lot of back and forth. And sorry, Roma, she resides in the Ukraine, and I'm in Canada, so everything was done remotely through my descriptions and through email.
Yeah, she does wonderful work too. And so what I'm wondering now is, I have a few pages here from the first issue. How many issues are you planning for the series?
It's a 3-issue miniseries. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and really dig deep into this comic book. Uh, we have grain, and there's a mystery behind it. So I know you don't want to reveal too much, but can you describe what or who grain is, or is that up for the reader to discover?
Yeah, that's mostly up for the reader to discover, but I can say that he is an alien of sorts,
Okay,
that has a connection to Earth, and he comes back in the form of a sand being. So his body is kind of like living kinetic sand,
I see.
and the bubble is symbiotic to Grain, but it's its own character as well. So when the two are together, that's kind of like, they're almost like brothers in a way, and they're both childlike. So Grain's a child, approximately 3, 4 years old. I don't really divulge the actual age, so
Right.
to the reader side, yeah. And Bubble kind of goes along with whatever Grain does, but you can get a sense that Bubble is a little more experienced and almost like a protector.
Which makes sense. Yeah, it's like a bubble protecting him. Uh, the sentience of the bubble I hadn't really thought about before, but now going back makes total sense. There's one panel in particular that was like, oh no, so close, and I won't give the details to it, but basically you see the bubble starts to open up a little bit, and you're like, oh, so close, like, oh man, it's heart wrenching.
It is heartbreaking, and even when I thought to myself, like, this is the third page into the book and there's
Yeah.
already a tragedy, so I was like, oh, should I do this? But I'm like, it had to be done for the sake of the story.
Yeah, it played out perfectly. Each panel is done so well. So to kind of give everybody an example of how this looks, the art style first I want to say is similar to Saga. Have you read the Saga franchise?
I haven't actually, no, but I have seen a few pages here and there, and it's definitely on my list of things I want to read in the future.
The story is wonderful story, but the art wise, it is these very vibrant characters that are just interesting to watch and look at, and sometimes the scenes, like the setting, is worth just taking a moment and really taking in, and that's something that we have here with these panels. So you'll have a backdrop of maybe just normal town America, and then you see grain flying in on different panels. But I found myself stopping and really enjoying how the houses are drawn, and how Grains, even the like the trail behind him that he makes, like this magical trail, and like very well done. And so, yeah,
Yeah, you're very perceptive actually. That's really great that you kind of dove into it. Just to clarify, so it does take place in over the cliffs of Dover, England. So
that's true. You're right.
yeah, it takes place in England, but yeah, really it's a universal story. Like, even if you didn't quite have the sense of where it was, you could tell that although we tried to make it look like it was Europe as best as we could.
That's yeah. That's very very poignant. That is a good point there. It does look like yeah. It just I think the benefit of it is it feels like I could be living there. So you feel so attached to it, and then as the story's going on, that's the part that's hurting, is the fact that you're attached to this place and you're seeing it from such an innocent point of view that it makes it hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like with the colors and everything, just because of, cartoons and stuff, I wanted this to have a cartoon feel as if you're
Yes.
watching an episode of something. And, you got those nice vibrant colors because, it's really hard to reproduce like a cartoon feel when you've got paper and it's a static image. You got to
Of
give the
course.
illusion that there's movement. But I think Roma really surprised me when it came to the colors because even after that test page, I wasn't expecting such vibrancy in particular areas. And you've got Grain's bubble and that sort of energy trail that's behind him
Hmm.
or around bubble. So yeah, she really brought that to life really well.
Ah, that's excellent. Grain's story, the way he's presented is, it's such a mystery that you're really almost wanting to see what's around the corner with him, and yet you're almost wanting to protect him a little bit. Like he's discovering this world, and as a viewer, you know what's going on because you see the setting, and so you're kind of like, ah, yeah, don't look into that too much. Uh, and then we also have his dialogue, which I thought was very unique. Do you want to speak to how he speaks? It's quite unique. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. When I first created Grain, I didn't quite know how he was going to speak, but I have a 3-year-old niece
Hmm.
who's 3 right now, so she was about one and a half. Well, actually one. And it's listening to kids speak. There's a lot of sort of broken English and bits and pieces, and they tend to refer to themselves, in the third person, I think it is, and
Yeah.
I thought it would be cool to have like a broken English with bits and pieces and sort of a jumble of words that you kind of know what they make. We kind of know what they mean when you hear them, but they're not the correct words. So I took some liberties with that dialogue, but I thought it worked well with Grain and his innocence.
Yeah, and one thing I really liked too is it conveys both emotion and there's like not a lot of adjectives almost, to where you see that he's just explaining what his emotions are, and then he's also trying to give you the information, and he doesn't know what he's trying to give you yet. And
Yes, definitely. So you're kind of learning along as he goes.
exactly, yeah, it's already got me enthralled, and I've just read 3 pages, and I'm already like, what's gonna happen to Grain? It's fantastic.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's really exciting to actually talk about this because I've only actually spoken about Grain to my family and my close friends. So, and I've actually had my 12-year-old niece read it, so she loves it. So I think the kids will enjoy this, and I think that families and people of all ages will really enjoy this story.
Yeah, the audience for this, while geared towards children, I think can be pretty much everyone, right? It feels like a story that everybody can enjoy, and this is a really good example of a comic book that's not necessarily like when people who are not familiar with the industry may think of comic books like, oh yeah, Superman, Batman, it's just superheroes. No, we can tell deep stories in this medium. We just have to, shed some light on them. They're just hidden away often.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's what like my own sense of style when it comes to writing is I like to kind of get sophisticated in areas. I like to throw in a bit of the abstract so that, the kids can enjoy the comic for what they see it as, but then the parents or teenagers or any age group can dive in and sort of scrutinize and analyze to see, deconstruct where my head was coming from.
You're right. Yeah. All right. Well, I can't suggest this comic book enough, guys, but let's go ahead and talk about the actual Kickstarter campaign and what we can do to help out. So, Mark, why don't you go ahead and break down what your goals are out of this Kickstarter campaign you're starting up?
Definitely. So the actual monetary goal, the financial goal, is $3,000, and that money will go towards printing the actual comic book itself and printing the rewards. So we've got a number of rewards that can be selected, and in the form of art prints. And we've got the comic book itself, and we've got the digital reward for the comic book, and we've also got some stretch goals that will unlock, something like a black and white PDF of grain, which the kids can print out the color.
Oh, that's a good idea. Wow, that's a really good idea.
Oh, thank you.
So,
So, we kind of put it all together, and it took a while to get that Kickstarter, composed, and it's my first Kickstarter as well. So, with the rewards, we've got some pretty wild rewards too that are really up there for people with deep pockets. So,
mhm.
you can also become a character in issue number 3, and there's even a 4-page story that can be purchased with you as the star of that backup story for Grain.
Those are creative rewards. That is something unique. We don't see that very often from other campaigns. That's pretty neat.
Cool.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and have the link to your Kickstarter campaign in the podcast. We're gonna have it in the YouTube form as well for you guys that watch our episodes on on YouTube. Is there anything else you want to get out there, Mark, before we head out?
Yeah, so the issue number 1 is actually complete. So when people come to this Kickstarter on September 3rd, they'll basically be, choosing rewards and knowing that the book is done. So there's no lag time. Once the Kickstarter is funded, I'm being positive here and assuming it will be. But yeah, the book will go straight to press once everything's done, and then we can ship out those rewards in November, December.
Okay, so November, December is when you guys can expect the rewards delivery. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's going to be it with Mark. And thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming on. It was fantastic talking to you.
Thanks for having me on board and letting me, talk and get creative about grain, and hopefully everybody gets some insight into the project.